Tesla shares were 226. Okay, so there were options that were granted to him, and he had the right to buy one share at $2.26. Let's see what happened at the end of 2022. Right about here. So let's just call it 200. Yeah, 227. Now, his 10 years was about to expire. If you do not use that right, it's use it or lose it. So suddenly it's worth nothing. So he had to exercise it. But as soon as you exercise it, you have a right to buy it. I'm just going to make it simple at $254. That means per share, I'm going to make $225. And I had millions of those, okay? In fact, probably more than 10 million. As soon as you exercise that, whether or not you sell the stock, doesn't matter. IRS says you bought something that was worth $227.54 by paying only $254. You made money, okay? So I'm gonna get my fangs on that $225. IRS considered that as income, so I'm gonna tax you. Well, if you're at Elon Musk bracket, even if you live in a state where there's no state income tax, your marginal is going to be about 40% minimum. So he actually had to pay a lot of taxes. But people like Elon Musk do not carry cash around. They invest in this. So he had to sell some stock to actually generate cash so that they could pay the taxes. And some of that, the value, now you have to attach a value as soon as you grant an option. You have to attach a value to it, and you have to amortize that over the vesting period. So if I say these options that I just gave Elon Musk is worth $30 million, and there are advanced ways to make such calculations that you'll find out in upper level finance classes. And essentially, I gave him something that's worth $30 million for the work that I expect him to do for me over the next 3 years. Remember, he can't use that over the next 3 years. It's like a delayed compensation. So every year, I'm going to write off 10% as delayed compensation. Those things that are written off actually are written under R&D. It's kind of has a logic to it, but it doesn't necessarily go to research and development. But we can figure out how much of that is actually stock-based compensation expense. Sometimes you just pay him in stock. That also goes to R&D. If something called restricted stock, you cannot sell it for a certain period of time, but you own it. You can only sell it sometimes when you leave the company or when you retire. But it's still something worth something. Tax treatment of that is different though. All right. And let's look at the operating margin. Let's calculate the operating margin. I'm going to be smart and not do a lot of stuff. I'm going to take the operating income, divide it by sales. So this says, if you don't worry about the value of those stock-based stuff, Apple roughly keep about $30 out of every $100 sales before they have to worry about things like income taxes and other stuff. Apple doesn't pay much income taxes. I mean, it looks like their percentage is about 15%. And if you actually look at how much federal taxes Apple pay in the United States, it's nada y nada y nada y nada. Okay? Nichelo, simple, zero. I can say zero in a lot of languages. None. And who knows why they're not paying any federal income tax in the United States. For tax purposes, Apple is headquartered in Ireland. Okay? Ireland has only, I think, 12% corporate income tax rate. US is now 22, just the federal, and there's also the states. This is called the tax arbitrage, also known as transfer pricing in accounting practice. I have a friend who's one of the partners, managing partners in Deloitte & Touche. The guy has a PhD in economics from Princeton. That's all he does. He optimizes the taxing structure for corporations. And you can calculate all of that. There's one more statement that you may not have heard much, and for the purpose of this class, we're going to use that only for very limited purposes. It is called statement of cash flows. What this actually does, every year it looks at how much your cash has changed, cash and cash equivalent, okay? And it kind of decomposes into its sources. Cash from operating assets, and where are you? It's actually 110. Investing activities, how much cash you generated from buying and selling securities and stuff, and how much cash you generated from financing activities. If you borrowed a lot more than you paid off debt, that's going to be a positive number, and so on and so forth. But on this one of the reasons I don't want to use that even for that limited purposes, this is calculated using the change in actual cash. But I view those marketable securities as almost cash, so this doesn't do what I want. If this was a valuation class, I would have actually modified this to handle that, but we're not going to worry about that here. I'm interested in the three items here. One is depreciation and amortization. That's $11 billion is part of the cost. So technically speaking, Apple actually is keeping a lot more because depreciation is a non-cash expense and it's part of cost of revenue or cost of sales. But look at this, $10 billion in share-based compensation expense. So if you had about $30 billion in R&D, Apple actually is doing only 20, which is not, peanuts. But, Apple is worth what, 2 trillion almost? Okay. I don't have to guess. Come on. Oh, almost 3 trillion, I'm sorry. Well, as my aunt would say, excuse me. She doesn't speak English, but hey, if she did, that's what he should have said. So for a $3 trillion company, 20 billion is not that much. One more thing I'm going to look at in statements of cash flow, payments of dividends, and any repurchases. Okay. And we'll talk about what that means. Payments of taxes related to net share settlement of equity awards. Sometimes, let's say, I got Elon Musk. I have to go through all of that. I have to buy shares at $295, which means I'm going to give money to the company. They're going to give me shares. So what you kind of do is, let's calculate the net amount I would have profited had I sold it $2 billion. Just the profit part. Divide that $2 billion by the current value of the shares. So just give me that many shares. That is so-called net share settlement of equity awards. But that changes the tax consequences. That's why they need an item like that. Again, if you're doing valuation, they would have worried about that. But I'm actually interested in that. How much money they spend for repurchase of stocks. That's kind of a different way of giving dividends. Instead of giving actual cash to shareholders, you tell them, I'm going to buy the shares back. You return the money that way. And we're going to look at those numbers when we do the so-called cash flow analysis. The cash flow in finance that we define has nothing to do with the cash flow. It's just something we're going to talk about next Monday. Now, on Wednesday, we'll talk about and do a lot of problems for income statements and balance sheets. We'll talk about different identities. For example, the mother of all accounting identities is the balance sheet identity. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. Okay? It's so important. Instead of 2 lines for identity, we use 3 lines. Because if they're not equal, there's something wrong. But we'll talk about other stuff too. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Again, think about 4 people that you want to be a group with for Jeopardy purposes. We're not going to do it until February 12th, but I kind of want to get the groups settled by next Monday. If you tell me that this 4 will work together, I'll put the rest randomly into groups. I'll see you guys Wednesday.
Have a good day.
You too.